Alright, so welcome back to another review. This time we're taking a look at these brand new headphones made in collaboration by Koss and Retrospect. I'll also be comparing them to the ever so popular Koss Porta Pros and the Koss KSC75Xs. Both of these are, well, Koss products, but they were made in collaboration with Massdrop. Now, before we begin, we're actually nearing the 3K mark, and I'd really appreciate it if you go down below and do what you do. Like, comment, subscribe, you know the deal. So there I was, getting ready to go to bed and surfing Reddit while I dozed to sleep. Next thing I know, I see a Koss headphone with bright orange foams on it, and I said, never really seen this one before. So I quickly read up on it and figured it would be worth the shot to take a look at it. I mean, hey, it's 29 bucks. So I got them in. I opened the package and said, wow, these are quite good looking. So I started playing music on them and, well, let's get into it. Now, the unboxing experience was quite simple. They come in a plain brown box with no logos or labeling of any kind. Open it up and you see the headphones wrapped in bubble wrap. You see this message from Retrospect themselves, briefly explaining the company's mission statement and greetings. Flip that around and you see that they've included a total of 5 exclusive stickers. Overall, a pretty nice personal touch. Now let's take a look at the build quality. I actually really like this build. It's nice and stylish and strikes a good balance between being this retro-looking, premium-feeling headphone without being gaudy and saying, "Look at me, I'm from the 80s. Joe, what? The headband is a silver finish and is made of metal. The headband adjustment mechanism also feels quite solid and will not slide once it is set in place. Now, it does not feature any sort of grooves or indicators, you just have to eyeball it really. It doesn't feature any sort of padding either, but you really don't need it. Now, as you can see, the Porta Pros feature metal and plastic on the headband and do possess a little bit of padding around the temples. The 75Xs simply use that ear clip-on made of rubber. Now, of course, inside it is a piece of metal, but the outside is in fact rubber. Or, well, should I say silicone. Now, the P21 look like they have the thickest padding of the bunch, but that's only because they also feature the thickest drivers. The depth of the foam is actually the same with all 3 of these. Now, the cables on all 3 of these are thin and flexible, but the P21 become dual rubber cables at the Y-split instead of staying as a single cable. Now, the P21, sticking to their aesthetic, do not feature an inline mic or volume buttons of any kind. Now, I appreciate the intention, but I really do wish they included them. Now, the Porta Pros come in various models, of course, so depending on which you pick, they might come without a mic, with a 1-button inline mic, with 3 buttons, or with a volume slider. As is the case with the Koss Porta Pro X, you get a single inline button and the mic. And as is the case with the KSC75Xs, they come with a single button inline mic, while the original KSC75s come without one. Now, at the amp termination, the P21 feature an aggressive 60-degree L-shaped plug with a silver-plated 3.5mm tip ring sleeve plug. The Porta Pros, again, come in various models, but the Porta Pro X feature a more heavily reinforced gold-plated straight 3.5mm tip ring sleeve termination, while the 75Xs feature a 45-degree gold-plated tip ring sleeve termination. So now let's move on to comfort. So right off the bat, the 75Xs will be the most comfortable of the bunch. Their earhook style doesn't add any pressure to your head or ears in any way. It's actually really easy to forget that you have them on. Though, me personally, I just don't like their fit. They feel like they're just sitting on your ear, just sort of awkwardly. Now, besides that, the P21 are actually not as comfortable as the Porta Pros. Let me explain though. So the P21s are comfortable, don't get me wrong, but their only point of contact, except for the headband, is at the foam pads. Because these drivers are less flat, and the fact that the pressure sits on your ears means that they shift on your head a little more easily. Though once they're in place, they hardly move. Now, the Porta Pros simply do this the best. They distribute the pressure amongst the ear pads and the temples. Though the one drawback is that once you take them off, the headband adjustment easily comes undone from its place. so it can be annoying to have to shift it back every other time you want to put them back on. Now let's talk a little bit about amplification. Because these are portable headphones meant to be used with portable devices, I'll be doing all of my testing through my Samsung Galaxy S20 Plus, i.e. the thing recording this video, so can't really show it. Sorry if I'm pointing at you, but like, I'm pointing at my phone. This phone delivers plenty of power, but it's not at the level of a desktop amplifier or even a portable amp such as the FiO Q3 I reviewed a little while back. Regardless, I think it's the best way to go since most users will do the same with these anyway. Now on the P21, I listen between 8 out of 15 and 9 out of 15, or around 60% volume. On the Porta Pros, I listen between 7 out of 15 and 8 out of 15. And with the KSC75s, I listen at around 8 out of 15. So as you can see, the Porta Pros are the most sensitive of the three, while the P21 are the least. Though they all fall within one volume notch of each other, so it's not that big a deal. So let's approach the sound portion. Now as I mentioned before, all testing was done using a mobile phone because that's essentially how these are meant to be used, on the go. However, I will throw this out there. If you plug these into an amp, the bass does get a little tighter and the overall sound becomes slightly cleaner, but yeah, you probably won't use it that way, will you? So let's start off with the bass here. So as far as bass guitars are concerned, the KSC75Xs actually have the best combination of factors here. The P21 have the weakest and most distant sounding bass guitar with the least amount of detail too. Now to its dismay, it can really be overpowered by the rest of the frequency. Now the Porta Pros have the strongest and thickest presentation of the three, but can be a bit excessive in more quiet areas like the inside of your home. As you head outside though, the background noises reduce the bass present to a point where it is only slightly forward, but still very discernible. So the 75Xs are that sweet spot between the two, featuring a very detailed response while also being respectful with their presence. Now with electronic bass, undoubtedly, the P21 gets left in the dust by both the Porta Pros and the KSC75Xs. So right off the bat, the P21 have the least amount of warmth to the notes, but they also possess a really wacky timbre to them. The bass has this effect like you're listening to it through a cup, like one of those phone cup games. And no, I'm not talking about mobile phones, Zoomers. It sounds as if the bass is at the end of the hall, like it's audible, but not a very pleasing sound at all. Now the Porta Pros, once again, possess the strongest bass response here. Now they are thick and rich, ooh mama, which is in fact a benefit for some electronic tracks. They also possess the deepest sub-bass and remain present for lower than its siblings. Thankfully, the K75X trail closely behind the Porta Pros in this regard. Though they are not the most powerful of the bunch, they have the cleanest bass without sacrificing enjoyability. Now with the drums, these are totally not peas in a pod whatsoever. The P21 have decent warmth to them, but they still possess that really wacky timbre to the sound. You really just can't shake it off. The Porta Pros are the absolute flip side of this equation. Their timbre is extremely thunderous and thick. I was swapping back and forth between the three, and when I got to the Porta Pros, the drums honestly kind of scared me a bit, I'm not gonna lie. Thankfully, there is that additional factor to consider. If you're listening to these outside, the bass levels do become a little reduced. Once again, the 75X stand as this sort of a sweet spot between the three. Though if I'm being nitpicky, they still lie a little south of neutral. Now let's get to the mids here. The 75X push vocals forward, and while they are clear, they can sound a bit shouty too. Now despite that, they actually possess the most accurate timbre of the three. Yeah, surprise, surprise. Now the P21, don't even get me started. So here I am, listening to Dream On, PMJ cover, and I'm waiting for the vocals to kick in. As I listen to the instruments, I feel as if there's something odd about their sound. It still has that wonky timbre to the sound, where it sounds like the sound is coming from a phonograph. Now when the vocals kicked in, I couldn't help but hop a little because of how atrocious it was. Remember what I said about the 75Xs? Okay, so amplify the pros and the cons times 3. It is really that wacky. Last of all, the Porta Pros. There's a combination of bad factors here that cancel each other out and end up producing an adequate result. So the vocals are actually the most recessed out of the three. However, they also have a slight amount of shoutiness going on. Your net result, they're a comfortable listen with detail that slightly pierces through the veil. So for overall instrumentation, I went ahead and busted out one of my favorites for this. Tank by the Seatbelts. Woo! First to try out, the 75Xs. these actually did a decent job at being somewhat accurate. Instruments were fast and airy, though perhaps a bit too airy. Overall though, decent detail and decent presentation actually. By the way, I should mention I'm not mentioning these in order from best to worst, I'm just mentioning them in the order I happen to go in. So next on the list, the P21. I swear to you, I hit play and I had to leave the room in stitches. The detail was decent, right? Nothing too fancy. It is that cursed timbre that got to me. I pushed play and immediately I got a flashback to watching Cowboy Bebop on Toonami back in the early thousands on my large Zenith CRT TV. Now, while I appreciated the nostalgia, the sound was, well, I did not appreciate the sound. So after that, I tried the Porta Pros. The instruments, while overall comfortable to listen to, were susceptible to that slight amount of lushness that did obscure the finer edges of the detail. Generally though, still within acceptable parameters. And now let's talk about the treble. Again, quite different from each other. So here's an example I love using. Easy Lover by Philip Bailey and Phil Collins, but it has to be the Chinese Wall album recording specifically. So I love using this example because the way the track was mixed was really off. The majority of the high end is noticeably forward than the rest of the instruments, especially the cymbals. So I use this track to test out a headphone's flaws in the treble. You know, if a headphone makes this particular track sound neutral, you know it's a dark headphone, etc. So the Porta Pros are very recessed in this area. So much so, it made the track sound balanced, hence my example. To the point where I could actually focus on the mids without the treble getting in the way. So for this particular track, it's a good thing. In general, not so much. Now the KSC75Xs are the closest to neutral of the bunch, but do possess a slightly forward treble response. Not only that, it does have its little peaks and flaws here and there. As for the P21, well...
Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah!
In terms of forwardness, it's around the same as the 75X. However, it is much more peaky, which makes certain instruments, like the cymbals, just punch you with vibrance. And not in a good way. The timbre is just so out of it. Next, I went ahead and tried an electronic track this time. Bangarang by Skrillex. Oh, the humanity. Seriously. The treble just ain't right. I can't stop talking about the timbre of these, but it's just because the flaw is just really that noticeable, particularly with those guitar notes heard throughout the track, especially at the beginning. It sounds like the guitar player walked up beside you, started plucking that string right in front of your ear canal. Now on the 75Xs, treble gets a little spicy for sure. The sibilance region gets right up to the point where it gets annoying, so it's still enjoyable, but it cuts it really close sometimes. This track really reminds you of how recessed the Porta Pros can get. I mean, the air in this track is almost non-existent, and the entire track sounds like it's being restricted somehow. It just sounds, well, straight up sounds muffled by comparison. So overall, the Porta Pros are too dark, the P21 are too bright, and the K75Xs are still a little too bright, but they can at least be listened to without pointing out a significant flaw to them. Now for Soundstage and Imaging. So right off the bat, the design of each of these will make the difference in soundstage that much more apparent. The Porta Pros are of a decent width, but because of that darker treble response, the details that float around just tend to disappear much faster than usual. The 75Xs are definitely wider than the Porta Pros. The design of the 75X really helps it widen its soundstage and create this illusion as if the sound were actually around you, not coming from a small driver next to your ear. Almost as if you were listening to a pair of speakers. Now the soundstage on the P21 is kind of hilarious, but it makes sense. So you got these little coin-shaped drivers right next to your ear, so what do you expect out of them? If you guessed a tiny sound, you'd be absolutely correct. These sound like there are two floating coin-shaped portals that are emanating sound from your ears. Like in Hotel California by the Eagles, you can hear the drums at 351 do the dun dun dun. Except it's all within a very restricted area, like just very narrow, decently clear, but very restricted. And now as far as imaging goes, the 75Xs are at the top for delivering a pretty good experience, with pretty much no qualms for me to complain about. The Porta Pros are right behind them, but due to their darkness, the most subtle of details just don't shine as well, resulting in a less discernible imaging experience. Last of all are the P21s, which still feature some, pretty decent imaging, but are weighed down by their general driver size and that timbre. And now the conclusion. So after trying out the new P21s and comparing them against the older siblings, the Porta Pros and the KSC75Xs, I think it's safe to say these ain't it. They're just not it. So just a dumb little idea I was thinking about when writing this review. Remember how I mentioned their timbre was a little off? Of course you do. Well, I mentioned they remind me of a phonograph, so I thought to myself, wait a minute, it all makes sense now. What if the P21 were designed as a throwback, not only in terms of looks, but in terms of sound signature as well? Obviously, it's just a joke, don't kill me in the comment section. But I made that little connection and I just had to point it out. You know how it is. Anyways, back to the point. There are numerous mods for the Porta Pros and the KSC75Xs, so it stands to reason that there may be some in the upcoming future for the P21 as well. Not only that, you can actually swap the drivers out and trade headbands with them. Actually, before I close the chapter on this comparison, I think I'll look up some mods and buy some extra items for them, like the Yaxi pads. So do expect a quick upcoming video regarding my results after trading headbands, applying mods, etc. But yeah, it's too bad really. They have such a cool aesthetic and I really appreciate their retro design. Oh well, back to the drawing board, Koss. And I'm really sorry for Retrospect too. This is like their big break, like, oh, we finally designed a retro product with a retro headphone designer. Amazing! Except they're not. They fell flat. I'm sorry, Retrospect. You have Koss to blame for that. Now, don't get me wrong. I love Koss's designs and headphones. They're fantastic. I own a pair of Porta Pros. I own a pair of KSC75Xs, so clearly, I must like them. And I do. But these just aren't it. They're not it. So just do yourself a favor. Wait for that upcoming video. Unless you want to buy them all and try them all, then hey, be my guest. The link's in the description. But other than that, well, that's going to do it for me, so thank you very much for watching this video. I hope it helped you reach a better purchasing decision, and I'll go ahead and see you in the next one. Okay, ciao.